Today we honor a story that demands to be told. The air was thick with a mixture of warmth and dread. It was a Friday evening in Oak Ridge, a small town nestled just on the outskirts of the sprawling city, far enough away to give the impression of peace, but close enough to have its own share of dark stories. The night seemed ordinary at first, no different from any other. But in the quiet neighborhood where Jack Warren lived, everything was about to change. Jack, a 35-year-old high school teacher, had always been known for his kindness. He wasn't just a man who did his job and went home at the end of the day. He gave his all to his students. The quiet, bookish man had an air of gentle wisdom about him that his colleagues admired. But outside of his career, Jack had a side to him that was even more vibrant. His family and friends knew him as someone who was always there when they needed him. Whether it was giving a hand during a house project or offering advice, Jack was a constant presence. But Jack was about to become the victim of a crime that no one saw coming. It all began on a Friday night much like any other. Jack had made plans to meet some old college friends at a local bar. They had a tradition, a reunion once a year to catch up, reminisce, and enjoy a drink together. As Jack texted his friend Sarah to confirm the time, he heard a knock at the door. Standing in the doorway was his neighbor, Ethan, a familiar face from down the street. "Hey Jack," Ethan said with a nod. "I saw the lights on. Thought I'd check in. Got a minute?" Jack paused, glancing over his shoulder at the clock on the wall. He hadn't planned to spend much time at home, but the familiarity of Ethan's voice softened his reservations. "Sure, what's up?" Jack said, stepping aside to let him in. They sat in the living room, small talk filling the space. Ethan didn't seem to have much to say beyond the casual conversation about work and the weather. It wasn't until the silence grew thick and the words began to come out in a stilted fashion that Jack noticed something was off. Ethan looked uneasy, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Jack had known him for years. He had been part of the neighborhood group that had helped organize barbecues, holiday events, and the occasional poker night. "Everything okay, Ethan?" Jack asked, his brow furrowing. Ethan swallowed hard, his eyes flickering nervously. "Actually, Jack, there's something I should have told you a while ago." Jack leaned forward, sensing the tension in the air. "What's going on?" I think you're in danger," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. Jack's heart skipped a beat. The words sent a chill running down his spine. "What do you mean?" he asked. Ethan's eyes darted to the window, then back to Jack. "There are things going on. Things you don't know about. People you don't know but they know you. You're a target, Jack. I don't know how or why, but I think they've been watching you." At that moment, the conversation abruptly ended when Jack's phone rang. It was Sarah asking if he was still on his way to meet her. The tension in the room was palpable, and Jack knew this was no coincidence. Before he could respond, Ethan was already rising from his chair. "I need to go," Ethan said quickly, his face pale, eyes wide with fear. "Stay safe, Jack. And whatever you do, don't ignore this. Trust me." Before Jack could ask him any more questions, Ethan was out the door, leaving behind an unsettling silence in the apartment. Jack's hand shook as he ended the call with Sarah, trying to process what had just happened. The disappearance came a few days later. Jack never arrived at the bar. His friends waited, then called, and when he didn't answer, they assumed he had gotten caught up in something else. But when the call started coming in from Lisa, Jack's younger sister, a different kind of worry began to grow. By Sunday morning, Jack was still missing. Lisa, his sister, drove straight to his apartment. It wasn't like him to miss plans, not without calling. She rang the doorbell, knocked and waited. Still there was no answer. His car was parked outside and the door was locked, but there were no signs of forced entry. After a few more hours of knocking and waiting, Lisa, feeling an overwhelming sense of dread, contacted the police. Detective Laura Simmons arrived that afternoon to take a look at the apartment. She stood outside watching the two officers search the area and glanced through the windows. As they made their way inside, Detective Simmons began reviewing the scene. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. Nothing seemed to miss. No signs of struggle. But then Detective Simmons found something strange. A broken cell phone lying next to Jack's favorite chair. The screen was cracked, but it seemed too clean, too deliberate. There were no messages, no signs of personal use, just a single missed call from Ethan. The room was cold and still, yet the unease lingered in the air. Detective Simmons knew there was something off about the situation. It didn't feel like a typical missing persons case. It felt like something darker, something deeper. As the investigation stretched into days and weeks, the police dug deeper into Jack's life. Sarah, his friend, had a solid alibi for the night he went missing. But she confirmed something strange. Jack had been talking about a new acquaintance. He mentioned someone who had approached him on social media. Someone offering him a business opportunity that he had shown some interest in. It didn't take long for Detective Simmons to pull up the name of a man, Victor Dalton, a name that hadn't come up in any of Jack's previous records. Victor was a man of mystery, rarely seen around town, but he had started showing up at the local gym, the same places Jack frequented. His name appeared on a newspaper article linked to an underground criminal syndicate operating just outside of town. This was the break the case had been waiting for. On a cold Thursday evening, Detective Simmons tracked down Victor's address and sent a team to surround the building. It was a rundown apartment complex far from the peaceful streets where Jack had lived. When they entered the building, the sense of foreboding deepened. The smell of damp wood and old carpet lingered in the air as they moved through the hallways, knocking on doors and asking questions. They found nothing. No signs of Victor, no sign of Jack. But as they searched the storage unit beneath the complex, they stumbled upon a small wooden crate. Inside it, tightly bound in black tape, were Jack's personal items. His wallet, his keys, and his watch. Everything was there except for his phone. The search continued and weeks turned into months. It seemed like every door they opened only led to more dead ends. Detective Simmons knew there was more to the story, but the pieces just weren't fitting together. Then came the breakthrough that no one had anticipated. Late one night, Lisa received a strange call. The voice on the other end was distorted, but the words that came through were clear. "I know what happened to Jack." The voice gave her an address, but when Lisa went to meet the caller, the address led her to an abandoned building in a neighborhood on the edge of town. It was cold, the wind blowing harsh against her face. Inside, the silence was deafening and Lisa's heart raced. She stood at the door, trembling, waiting for someone to approach her, but no one came. Just as she was about to leave, a shadow appeared in the corner of her eye, a figure in a dark hoodie emerging from the shadows. Lisa stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat as the figure from the shadows slowly approached. The man's figure grew clearer as he stepped into the dim light of the street lamp. Ethan, her brother's neighbor, the man she had trusted, now stood before her, his face obscured by the hood of his sweatshirt. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling. His eyes met hers, but there was nothing recognizable in them, just a cold, hard emptiness. It was the look of someone who had buried his humanity under a facade of calculated indifference. "I didn't think you'd show up, Lisa." His voice was low, rough around the edges, as though he had been waiting for this moment far longer than she had realized. "What is this?" Lisa asked, her voice shaking as she struggled to process the situation. Ethan, who had always been there, someone she thought she could rely on, was now standing before her in the dark, offering no explanation for his cryptic message and looking as though he were hiding something terrible. "I know what happened to Jack." Ethan's words hung in the air like a dark omen. The statement hit Lisa like a physical blow. She had been so certain that Jack's disappearance was the result of something out of her control, something she could not have anticipated. But now, standing before her was someone who knew more. Ethan was involved, and that knowledge twisted something deep inside her. Her pulse quickened and she instinctively took a step back. "What do you mean? What happened to Jack?" Ethan didn't move. He stood still, watching her with a look that combined regret and coldness. "There's more to this than you think, Lisa." He paused, glancing over his shoulder as though checking for someone else. "But you can't tell anyone what I'm about to say." His voice dropped to a whisper. "It's dangerous." Lisa's mind raced. The dread that had been building since she first received the mysterious phone call now settled in her stomach like a heavy stone. "Tell me." Her voice was firm, though her hands were shaking. "Tell me everything." Ethan looked at her again, his gaze hardening. Then, with a defeated sigh, he took a step closer, lowering his voice even further. "Jack didn't disappear. He was taken." The weight of his words hit Lisa like a slap to the face. Jack had been taken. Not just vanished, taken. Her stomach churned as she processed the implications. "Who took him?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan hesitated. His eyes flickered with guilt. And for a moment, Lisa saw a faint trace of the man she had once known. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "I can't say, not directly. But I'll tell you this, Lisa." Ethan's eyes hardened again. "If you keep digging, if you keep asking questions, it won't just be you getting hurt." Lisa stepped back, feeling her blood run cold. Was Ethan threatening her? How could she trust him now? He was so close to Jack, and yet the answers he was offering seemed to push her deeper into a maze of uncertainty. Her mind was swirling and she needed to think. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked, trying to steady her voice. Ethan shifted his weight uncomfortably, his eyes darting around again, almost as if he were looking for someone. Because it's getting too dangerous for me too. There's a lot of money involved, Lisa. A lot more than you realize. At that moment, Lisa's phone vibrated in her pocket. She startled, but Ethan gave her no time to check it. Don't say anything to anyone. Ethan's words were cold and final. Not yet. Wait until you know what's at stake. Lisa's heart pounded in her chest. She didn't know if she should feel relieved that Ethan had at least given her a hint of the truth or if she should be terrified of the consequences. Without another word, Ethan turned and disappeared into the shadows, vanishing as quickly as he had appeared. As Lisa stood in the cold, trying to piece together the puzzle that was falling apart in her mind, Detective Laura Simmons was back at the station, combing through every lead she could find. The pieces were there, just barely, but the picture wasn't clear. And then came the tip. The phone call came in the following morning. It was a local anonymous source who claimed to have seen Ethan leaving the scene of a warehouse on the outskirts of town. Lisa knew the place. It was an old abandoned building on the edge of town used by drug dealers and other criminals to hide their activities. Detective Simmons immediately moved in to investigate. Lisa joined her, her heart still pounding from the night before. She had barely slept. The unease gnawed at her, and the nagging thought that there was more to Ethan's involvement in Jack's disappearance hung heavily on her mind. What was he hiding? The warehouse was just as grim as Lisa had imagined. Large, dilapidated, and isolated from the rest of town. Detective Simmons led the way, her flashlight cutting through the dark and revealing the dust-covered remnants of the building's past. Old crates, rusted machinery, and broken windows filled the space with an eerie emptiness. But then they found something. A set of footprints fresh in the dust. They led them to the far corner of the warehouse, where a heavy steel door was barely hanging on its hinges. As they approached the door, a low hum of machinery echoed in the distance. Detective Simmons motioned for Lisa to stay back as she approached the door. Her flashlight illuminated a set of rusted chains and a padlock on the other side. Lisa's breath caught in her throat. This was not the kind of place Jack would have willingly walked into. With a swift motion, Detective Simmons broke open the lock and the door creaked open to reveal a hidden room. Inside they found something they had never expected. A makeshift cage barely large enough for one person to sit comfortably was situated in the middle of the room. But it wasn't just the cage that made Lisa's stomach drop. It was the burned photo of Jack pinned to the wall above it. His face distorted and cracked, stared back at her with hollow eyes. Lisa stumbled backward, her body trembling with shock. What is this? Lisa's breath caught in her throat as her eyes fell on the burned photograph of Jack, now pinned with a rusted nail to the wall above the makeshift cage. The photo was singed at the edges, disfigured and unrecognizable, but it was Jack. His face twisted in a way that suggested torment, his eyes staring out in frozen horror. The air in the room grew thicker, heavier, as if the walls were closing in on her. She staggered back. The reality of what she was seeing crashing into her like a wave. Jack had been here in this room, and whatever had happened to him was something far darker than she had ever imagined. Simmons, standing beside her, didn't seem fazed by the photo. Her steely gaze swept across the room as she methodically checked every corner, her flashlight cutting through the dark. Lisa's heart raced. How could she not be disturbed by this? How could she stand there so composed when it felt like their entire world was falling apart? Detective, Lisa whispered, her voice trembling. What is this? What happened to Jack? Simmons didn't immediately answer. Instead, she crouched down, inspecting the cage, running her fingers over the old dusty bars. The metal looked worn and rusty, as though it had been used for far too long. There were no signs of recent activity, no signs of struggle, but the chilling presence of the place told Lisa everything she needed to know. This was where Jack had been held. This was where he had been broken. Simmons finally looked up, her face hard, but with a flicker of something else. Something that Lisa couldn't place. This isn't just some random case of a missing person, she said quietly. This is organized. Someone put Jack here and someone meant to make a statement. Lisa's stomach twisted. The words seemed to echo in her mind, but they didn't make sense. A statement? Who would do this? Why Jack? The detective didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stood up and glanced around the room again, her eyes scanning for something Lisa couldn't see. She looked over her shoulder at Lisa and finally spoke in a low measured tone because Jack got too close to something dangerous, something bigger than Oak Ridge. This wasn't about Jack personally. He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. The weight of those words crushed Lisa's chest, but she wasn't about to back down. What do you mean? What did he get mixed up in? And why didn't you tell me this sooner? Simmons's gaze softened for a fraction of a second, and Lisa could see that she was trying to carefully choose her next words. I didn't have the full picture until now, Lisa. You have to understand there's a criminal network operating here right under our noses. And Jack got involved. Maybe without even realizing it, he got too close to the people behind it and they didn't take kindly to that. Lisa felt the cold sting of dread run down her spine. A criminal network. Jack had been involved in something that dangerous. The man she knew, kind, compassionate, a teacher who cared about his students. How could he have gotten involved in something like this? How could he have been targeted? She opened her mouth to speak, but Simmons held up a hand. It's not what you think. He wasn't a criminal, Lisa. He was just a pawn. They used him to move something, and when they realized he was catching on, they decided to shut him down permanently. Lisa's mind reeled as she processed the detective's words. Who did this? Who are they? And where is Jack now? Simmons didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned and began scanning the room again, checking corners, looking for anything that might give them another clue. Lisa's thoughts were spinning, but she couldn't lose focus. She needed answers. Needed them now. Detective, please. Lisa pressed. Who's behind this? Finally, Simmons looked at her, her face grim. I don't know yet, but I've got a name. Lisa's heart leapt. Oh, Victor Dalton? Simmons replied. Lisa's blood ran cold at the mention of the name. Victor Dalton? Who is he? I've never heard of him. Simmons's eyes narrowed. He's not from around here, but he's connected to something bigger. He's been linked to an underground syndicate operating just outside of Oak Ridge. Illegal arms dealing, human trafficking, the works. And from what I've gathered, Jack somehow got mixed up with him. He probably didn't even know it at first, but once they realized he was getting too close to their operations, they took him. The words were like ice water freezing Lisa's entire body. Jack involved in something like that. It didn't make sense. It couldn't be true. But the evidence was here. The cage, the burned photo, Ethan's strange behavior. It was all connected. Lisa took a step forward, her fists clenched in anger and desperation. We have to find him. We have to get Jack back. Simmons nodded, her face hardening with determination. I agree, but we need to be careful. If Dalton's involved, then we're dealing with something much bigger than we thought. This isn't just a local crime anymore. This is international. But just as Simmons turned to face Lisa, there was a sudden noise, footsteps behind them. Lysol spun around, her heart pounding. Someone was there. But who? Before Lisa could react, the figure stepped out of the shadows. Ethan. And in his hands he held a gun. You shouldn't have come here, Ethan said, his voice low cold. The tension in the warehouse was unbearable. Ethan, once the friendly neighbor who had waved at Lisa across the street, now stood before her, his hand gripping a gun with deadly precision. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear and determination. But beneath that, Lisa saw something darker. A man caught between the truth and the lies. A man who had sold his soul to forces far beyond him. Ethan, Lisa whispered, her voice trembling. What are you doing? This isn't you. Ethan's eyes flickered with something. Perhaps a moment of doubt, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. He raised the gun slightly, his knuckles white against the barrel. I didn't have a choice, Lisa, he said, his voice strained. You don't understand. It's too late for me now. Too late for all of us. Lisa's heart ached. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, to understand how this man, the man who had been her neighbor, her friend, could do something so terrible. But she knew there was no time for questions now. She needed to act, to think fast, or this would end in disaster. Behind her, Simmons moved slowly, trying to get into position. Lisa could feel the detective's presence, her calm, calculated approach, but it didn't help her calm the storm inside her. Her mind was racing, her thoughts jumbled with a million possibilities. What had happened to Jack? Where was he? And why had Ethan been involved? You need to put the gun down, Ethan, Lisa said, trying to steady her breath. Her voice calm but forceful. This isn't the way. It doesn't have to end like this. Ethan's grip on the gun tightened. His eyes shifted nervously, scanning the room as if he were looking for an escape. But the truth was there was no escape. Not anymore. I don't have a choice, Lisa. Ethan repeated, his voice cracking. They'll come for me. They'll come for all of us if I don't follow through. Simmons took a cautious step forward. Her voice was firm, but laced with an urgency Lisa hadn't heard before. Who, Ethan? Who's coming for you? Ethan flinched at the question, his gaze darting between Lisa and Simmons. He looked as though he were about to crack, as though the weight of everything he had done was finally catching up with him. But then, just as quickly as it came, his resolve returned. He squared his shoulders and lifted the gun, pointing it directly at Simmons. Victor Dalton, Ethan whispered, his voice trembling with fear. He's the one behind it all. He's the one who pulled the strings. I thought I could stay out of it, but I was wrong. Now there's no way out. No one walks away from this. Lisa's heart pounded in her chest. Victor Dalton, you're working for him. You've been working for him this whole time. Ethan nodded slowly, his face a mixture of regret and fear. It wasn't supposed to be this way, Lisa. I never wanted any of this. But once you're in, you can't get out. They know everything. They know everything about you, about me, about Jack. Lisa's mind spun as she tried to process the magnitude of what Ethan was saying. Victor Dalton was behind everything. The syndicate, the threats, Jack's disappearance, it was all connected to him. But why had Ethan been involved? Why had he chosen to work for someone like Dalton? It's too late for all of us, Ethan continued, his voice breaking. I didn't want to hurt anyone, but I had to. I had no choice. Jack didn't understand. He was getting too close to the truth, and that's why he's gone, because he couldn't be controlled. Lisa's breath hitched in her chest. What do you mean? What happened to Jack? Tears welled up in Ethan's eyes, but he didn't allow them to fall. Instead, he turned his gaze toward the floor. He's dead, Lisa. They took him. They made sure he wouldn't talk. They made sure he would never get in the way. Lisa felt the world shift beneath her feet. Jack, her brother, the man she had trusted, the man she had fought so hard to find, was gone. Dead. And Ethan had been a part of it. No, Lisa whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. No, you're lying. Jack is not dead. He's not. Ethan's eyes filled with regret as he lowered the gun slightly. He shook his head, his body sagging under the weight of his guilt. I'm sorry, Lisa. I never meant for any of this, but I can't undo what's been done. Simmons stepped forward, her voice calm but unwavering. Ethan, I know you're scared, but there's still time to make this right. You can still help us take down Dalton. Help us find Jack. Tell us where he is. But Ethan only shook his head, a sad, almost defeated smile playing on his lips. It's too late for that, detective. Dalton's already made his move, and now we're all just waiting for the end. Before anyone could react, a sudden noise echoed through the warehouse. A deep rumbling sound that seemed to shake the ground beneath them. It wasn't a gust of wind or the sound of the building settling. It was something else, something far more ominous. Lisa's heart raced as she spun around, trying to locate the source of the noise. Simmons did the same, her hand instinctively reaching for her weapon. Get down? Simmons shouted, pushing Lisa to the floor. Lisa barely had time to react before the explosion hit. The world erupted in a cacophony of sound and heat as the shock wave from the explosion threw them to the ground. The air was thick with smoke and debris rained down from the ceiling, filling the space with dust and chaos. Lisa's ears rang, and for a moment she couldn't see anything through the blinding smoke that enveloped them. Her head spun as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. Lisa, are you okay? Simmons's voice cut through the haze, but it felt distant, muffled. Lisa tried to move, but her body felt heavy. Her limbs uncooperative. She shook her head, clearing the fog, and forced herself to focus on the sound of Simmons's voice. I'm fine, Lisa gasped, though her voice wavered with uncertainty. She pushed herself up, blinking through the dust. What the hell was that? Simmons was on her feet now, her gun drawn and ready. She looked around, scanning the area for any threats, her eyes darting from one shadow to the next. But there was no time to waste. That, Simmons said, her voice tight with urgency, was a warning. Dalton's men are here. The smoke began to clear and Lisa could see the devastation. The walls of the warehouse were cracked, the air thick with dust and the smell of burning. But in the midst of the wreckage, a figure emerged, one that sent a chill down Lisa's spine. Victor Dalton. He stepped into the clearing, his silhouette cutting through the smoke like a shadow. His eyes gleamed with cold, calculating malice as he surveyed the wreckage. His lips curling into a sinister smile. Well, he said, his voice smooth and cruel. It looks like you found me after all. Lisa's blood ran cold. Dalton was here. And if he was here, that meant one thing. Jack was gone for good. He wasn't coming back. You, Lisa cried, her voice shaking with fury. You took him. You killed my brother. Dalton's smile only widened. I did what I had to do, Lisa. Jack was a liability. He knew too much. And now so do you. Simmons stepped forward, her gun aimed directly at Dalton. We're not going to let you get away with this. Dalton's eyes flicked to the gun and then to Ethan, who stood silently in the corner, his face a mixture of regret and fear. You think you can stop me? You think I'm afraid of you? Dalton's voice was laced with dark amusement. But before anyone could react, the sound of approaching vehicles echoed in the distance. The sound of sirens grew louder, faster until they filled the air. And then the heavy doors of the warehouse burst open, and a group of armed officers stormed in, led by none other than Detective Simmons's backup. "Hands in the air, Dalton," one of the officers shouted, his weapon drawn. Dalton's smile faded, his eyes narrowing. He looked around, but it was too late. The warehouse was surrounded and there was no escape. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Lisa saw the man who had caused so much pain and loss. The man who had torn her life apart finally faced the consequences of his actions. The officers moved in swiftly, securing Dalton and placing him in handcuffs. He struggled for a moment, but it was clear he was defeated. Lisa felt a cold sense of finality settle in her chest. The nightmare was over, but the cost had been too high. It took weeks for everything to be sorted out. Ethan was arrested and charged with his involvement in the criminal syndicate. And though he had cooperated with the authorities, Lisa couldn't find it in herself to forgive him. His actions had cost Jack his life, and nothing could erase that. As for Victor Dalton, his arrest marked the beginning of the end for the criminal organization that had plagued Cedar Grove for years. The authorities had uncovered a massive network of illegal activities, from human trafficking to arms dealing, and Dalton was just the tip of the iceberg. But the damage had already been done. Lisa stood in the quiet of Jack's apartment, staring out the window. The city lights twinkled in the distance, but they felt distant, almost out of reach. Her brother was gone, and nothing could bring him back. But as she stood there, a small part of her found solace in knowing that at least Jack's death had not been in vain. His disappearance had led to the fall of a dangerous criminal empire, and the truth had finally been brought to light. And that was something. This story moved you, helped keep their memory alive. Subscribe for more stories where truth refuses to stay buried and justice always finds a way. Like and comment below with your thoughts on the story. Your support means a lot. Thanks for watching.